a lot about the Cuban medical mission in Jamaica. Many people had bleeding hearts when they heard the news last week that the government and its Cuban counterpart had failed to reach agreement on a new deal where the medical program was concerned. And so for the moment it has been ended. It is ended, terminated. And I got messages from even family members saying, what the hell is happening? How is it that the Cubans who have treated us so good, we managed to not strike a deal with them? What is the government doing? And of course, the opposition, PNP, though not as, well, not even not as, not at all bellicose, warlike in their approach to the issue. A statement from Alfred Dawes telling the Jamaican people the right thing, that we should be grateful and we should praise Cuba for the help that we've gotten over the years from their medical professionals. And then Senator Scott Motley also with a measured statement. Based on the PNP's previous posture, you'd have expected them to be on the front foot, banging the drums loudly and demanding answers. And while she asked for answers to questions, Scott Motley was rather measured in her response, which tells you that there is something under the gravy. Over the weekend, a document emerged which finally gave me insight into this Cuban medical program that I had not been able to find previously. And from what I've read in this document, all 44 pages of it, there appears to be, I won't say a justification for the United States' stance towards the medical program and them using their muscle to impose their weight on Caribbean countries who have this medical program to discontinue said medical programs. I wouldn't say there appears to be justification, but you can see why the US has taken this stance and has flexed its muscle in the way it has. Because maybe like you or the other person, Tana, I thought that the medical mission over the years, over the decades, Scott Motley said almost 50 years, and then the education program, which was formalized thereafter, and which was which followed the building of 4 schools, yeah, that the Cuban government was just so benevolent to give us this assistance and send us their professionals, and that this was the basis, benevolence and a love for humanity and the desire to help a brother in need, our sister in need, was at the heart of this medical mission and this education mission. There's an organization called Cuba Archive, or Free Society Project. They were founded in Washington, D.C. in 2001. Now they're headquartered in Miami. They have prepared a brief on the education mission and the medical mission, which tell a different story, to suggest it's not about benevolence, it's not about brotherly love, it's not about the goodness of their heart, but that the Cuban government has used the medical mission and the education mission to make profit, huge profits, and effectively have pressed into servitude the workers that they've sent here over 50 years as medical professionals, and relatively laterally, as education professionals. I'm going to start in this short time I have with, and I'm going to go quickly. So if anything falls through the cracks, hopefully we'll have some time for calls later where I can explain some more. In 2023, the former Cuban ambassador, to Jamaica, Ambassador Quinones Sanchez, he accused the US of waging a, quote, very dirty campaign against Cuba, end quote, and said that the Cuban doctors have a salary in Cuba, that the ambassador said in 2023 that not only do the Cuban doctors have a salary in Cuba, they get 100% of their salary. And they also receive a huge amount of money working wherever they are as part of the agreement signed with the Cuban government. And that when they come to Jamaica, it doesn't mean they lose their job in Cuba. He said Cubans working in Jamaica have the benefit of bringing their family to vacation in Jamaica, paid for by the Cuban government. The investigation done by CubaArchive.org makes a lie of every single one of those claims. Now, the authors of this 44-page document looking at Cuba's internationalist mission in Jamaica and calling it troubling collaboration. It says that the Cubans who have been brought here, well, we know what slavery is. Obviously, we would know. We are experts in it. Our ancestors were enslaved. So we're not going to compare anything likely to that. But it's the kind of servitude that if you were to stretch the definition of slavery, which we won't, it's a kind of servitude which is inhumane. That's the kind of program that this document, these are Cubans who've done the research, and they don't have, they say, the cooperation agreement between the Cuban government and the Jamaican government. But what they have are the contracts that individual workers signed with their Cuban government. Those are what they have put evidence, as far as evidence, they put pictures of them in the document. They've quoted from them extensively. They've redacted certain parts to keep people's identity secret. So what they did, they got information from about 3 doctors over a period. And they also got information from teachers. And they've used that to say, well, this is the arrangement that exists between the Cuban government and the medical professionals and the education professionals to prove their argument that it is a glorified system of servitude that the researchers say the government of Jamaica has been drawn into, and that the government of Jamaica has facilitated Cubans being pressed into servitude to the benefit of their country. In 2023, based on the information that the researchers were able to collate, they found that Cuba benefited to the tune of $4.4 billion US from the people they had working outside of Cuba in other countries. How do you say, well, how did that sum come about? How does the Cuban government earn from its citizens working outside of Cuba? By taxes? No, not by taxes. By direct hand in the pocket, if we are to believe the researchers here. So let me quickly get to it. One doctor told the researchers that the regulations force all workers exported by the Cuban government and all Cubans who travel abroad on official missions to subordinate themselves to Cuban supervisors. It includes numerous arbitrary restrictions, such as the forced return to Cuba after performing their assigned duties and on the date and transportation indicated, and forbids driving any means of transportation without authorization. So you can't drive car at Jamaica unless the Cuban government says you can drive a car. Failing to comply with the imposed location system, associating with anyone who does not support revolutionary ideals, having relationships with or marrying locals without informing supervisors, and speaking to the media without informing supervisors. The regulations establish a detailed disciplinary framework with consequences of escalating severity. Sanctions include public reprimand, fines of up to 25% of the salary in national currency for up to 6 months, loss of remuneration, reassignment to a position with inferior working conditions, transfer to another locality under worse conditions, demotion from a higher rank position, revocation of the mission, expulsion from the mission. So these just say, well, simple thing, the Cuban government sending their people overseas and tell them that they mustn't have any relationships with locals and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that. All right, listen to this now. The Cuban worker in Jamaica, and this is specific to Jamaica, Dr. Number 1, he says, I was sent to a region of the country outside the capital, and I had to pay the bulk of my wages went back to the Cuban government. So if he made $1,200 US in the month, he kept $200 US to pay his rent and utilities and everything else. The rest of the money was taken by the Cuban government. And then when he got a bonus, 50% of that bonus, meaning for overtime, not a bonus, an overtime payment, 50% of all payments like overtime went to the Cuban government. So they testify here, the doctors interviewed, that when the Cuban government takes the money that they work, the overwhelming majority of the money they work, and they take half of the extras that they work as well, that they barely are able to survive. Some of them, they eat rice alone because that's what they can afford, because when you are left with $200 US left, what can you buy? They say, the doctors interviewed by this publication. They are forbidden by the Cuban government from practicing private medicine in Jamaica, so the government of Jamaica can hire them privately. They have to grant the health ministry in Cuba broad powers on their behalf as legal representatives in Jamaica. As I said, they have to travel back to Cuba at the end of their contract and during vacation periods. They have to surrender their passport to the chief of mission upon arrival in Jamaica. Tufton told us last Friday that the government of Jamaica was concerned about this, and they ended this aspect. They have to submit to the health ministry in Cuba on a monthly basis a copy of their payslip within 10 days of receiving their payslip, a sworn statement to confirm that this payslip is accurate, and proof of the bank deposit of the money that they are sending back to Cuba. They receive 100% of their salary in Cuba, so they get a Cuban salary, but this Cuban salary was equivalent to $50 per month in 2018 and $4 US per month in 2025 when this document was prepared. And there is a penalty of up to 8 years in prison if a Cuban doctor here or teacher abandons the mission and goes into private practice or leaves this country for another country. If they are caught, the law in Cuba, 1976 Penal Code, says up to 8 years in prison. So the time is up. The time flies. But there are so many details in here. The point is, you have to ask questions. You can't draw and jump to conclusions. Have we benefited? And we certainly have benefited. Many of us have benefited from the service of a Cuban nurse or a Cuban doctor or a Cuban health professional. And Jamaica is better for the Cubans having been here. There's no question about that. And we don't regret the service that the Cubans have given. But under what conditions and at what cost? Has the Cuban government over time, according to this document and according to the US officials, been pressing their own people into a process and system of servitude where they have them working here, taking the bulk of their pay, taking a half of anything extra that they do, and then bringing them back to Cuba after 2 or 3 years and repeating it with a new batch? Is that what has happened over 50 years? And is that why this medical mission is no more? Because the US has told its partners, including Jamaica, that that practice can work no more. Just questions this morning based on what we've read over the weekend.